Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make an art journal page that's glitzy and glimmery and so much fun. We're going to use some stamps, and you can find the stamps that I used at our sponsor, topflightstamps.com. I'll have links in the video description and a coupon code to save you 10% on your order, and orders over 50 in the United States ship free. And this page actually has a lot of different things going on, but we're going to break it down step by step. And I have to tell you, when I start an art journal page, I have no idea what I'm going to end up with, so you can take this journey with me as I discover what I'm gonna do. Whenever I start an art journal page, I like to start really organically, meaning I don't plan ahead too much. I'll grab a few art supplies that I want to use, I'll grab the paper I want and the stamps that I want to play with, and then I pretty much just let my imagination take over. Now, I figured I wanted to put a bunch of butterflies down and I might want to mask them, so I decided to go ahead and stamp that butterfly from Carabelle Studios onto a post-it note and cut that out ahead of time so that I wouldn't have to stop while I was in the flow of creating and make a mask. And if you don't get your masks too gunky, you can save them right in the little envelopes that your stamp sets come in, and then you'll have them the next time you do a project. I'm using stamp sets from Visible Image and Carabelle Studio today. Whenever I use this stamp mount, I get asked about it. This rocking mount is called a Mega Mount by Impression Obsession. I also have the Rock-a-Blocks, and they work great too. The Mega Mount's just a little bit bigger. That's the only real advantage. But I really like it because while I'm working on my upstairs table, I'm not sure how good the surface is for stamping, so that rounded stamp block really helps with really detailed or larger stamps. So here what I'm doing is using watercolor crayons to ink up my stamp, and I like this because you get a very painterly artsy look and it's really easy. So what I do is I spritz the stamp with a little water and then I color directly on with the watercolor crayons. Alternatively, you could dip the crayon for a quick second into a bucket of water and you could color that way too. Sometimes you'll need to spritz the stamp to get the media to transfer, but the more you do this technique, the more you can get a feel for how the impressions will go. You basically want it a little damp, but you don't want it gushy. But if it's really gushy, you'll get a beautiful watercolor effect. If it's just, slightly damp, you'll get a more tight ink-like effect. So play with these and see what effect you like best. You can always practice on some typing paper until you get the hang of it. And often, I'm changing colors because I want the butterflies to be a little different each time. But if you weren't changing colors, you could probably get 2 or 3 stamps, impressions out of one loading up of the watercolor crayon. If you look at that butterfly I just stamped, you'll see it's a little more detailed because the stamp was a little less wet. I was getting a feel for how wet I should have them. And then my stamp image improves because I just get more used to it. It won't really matter for this technique because we're going to end up doing a lot of stuff to those butterflies, but I wanted to show you that because it's a technique I use a lot and I really think is useful. I'm using some ink-filled pens to color in the facial features because I want those to be nice and bright, the lips and the eyes, and those are Jane Davenport mermaid markers, and the watercolor crayons I just used were a mixture of Jane Davenport watercolor crayons or aqua pastels and the Dina Wakley scribble sticks. Now I'm using a brand new supply to me. It's a Stabilo all pencil. It's I thought it was more like a grease marker, but to tell you the truth, it's an awful lot like a watercolor pencil, and if I knew how much like a watercolor pencil it was, I wouldn't have bought it, but I was curious, and I also bought some grease pencils, and you'll see me use those in a little while. I haven't used them since I was a kid, and I was really curious about them, and I thought I'd give them a try. So because I use that Stabilo all pencil, which is like a watercolor pencil, when I'm adding some watercolor crayon and water in my wet brush, I get this really nice actually shading. So it's a brown Stabilo all pencil, and it's the kind of flesh colored aqua pastel, and it's really giving me a nice effect. I thought I might have to go in with acrylics, and that's why I chose to use Benfang acrylic paper, which is brand new, which I love, which I was really surprised because I don't love their watercolor paper. But when I picked this up, I was like, oh, I must use this with watercolors and water media, even though it's an acrylic paper, because it just feels like sumptuous luxury in paper. It's gorgeous. And if you notice the side of the paper, how it's got that like tear out strip stuff, that will slide back in the journal, so you can take your page out, get it all done, and then stick it back in your journal when you're done. So I don't know if all the stores have this paper yet. It was brand new to me. I just kind of tried it on a lark, and I'm really happy that I did. So here what I'm doing is using some metallic watercolor paints, and I am just kind of doing an ombre sunset background. I really didn't have much of a plan here. And I was pretty happy with everything I'd put down so far. So I'm like, well, I really don't want to, like collage over it or anything, so I decided I would just kind of fill in the white space with these metallic paints. These metallic paints, they're watercolor, but they don't like flow around like your traditional watercolor. They almost feel more like a, oh, I would almost say like a pigment ink once you start applying them, because they're very creamy, and they feel, I guess, oily almost, because they're just, I mean, they dry hard in their little pans, but they just are just so creamy when they go on, and they're actually quite opaque. You can paint on them with black. I don't do brush lettering. I should say I don't do any brush lettering I'm going to show anybody, but they would be really good for that if you needed that sort of thing. So I thought I had the head a little too high, so what I'm doing is erasing the watercolor crayon and all pencil that I have in there. So basically I just scrubbed over it with water, and then I went back in with that metallic watercolor paint, since I knew it was so opaque and thick that it would cover up any like smudgy dirtiness left on the paper from where I tried to scrub it out. And at this point, I am just going to add a little bit of blush to the cheeks, nose, and chin, and just kind of evaluate and see what I need to do next. Now I have a confession to make. I love frosted pastel eyeshadow, so when I saw this metallic aqua color, I knew she had to have some fabulous cat's eye winged eyeliner or eyeshadow done in that, and that's what I did. And then I decided to add some of the golden color to her hair, just to give it a light floatiness that I wanted to have this kind of like carefree vibe about her, and having a lighter hair and the lighter eyeshadow was just a great way to get that effect. I did want her to have darker hair though, because I have the dark eyebrows. So I took this dark brown mermaid marker and started to put in deep shadows in the hair. So even though I have those kind of lighter, almost like sun-kissed highlights, that darker pen will give me the details that I want. Next, I want to add some color to the butterflies, because there's still a lot of white paper showing through, and I wanted it to have a little bit more of a punch of color. So I'm using that metallic watercolor to go over each butterfly with their respective colors. Now I have mixed obviously water with this watercolor, because that's what you do, and I made sure there was enough water in the watercolor that you could see through it and see the stamping and details underneath. I wanted it to be subtle, but I did want it to be there. If you use this paint really thickly with very little water, like on black cardstock, it is opaque and super bright, so you can adjust that effect by adding more water or less water to your liking. And I just followed that kind of rainbowy spectrum, kind of not going in the order of the rainbow, but just kind of going in the order of like the color wheel, just to kind of fill those in. Now this effect is a major fail, so I like to keep it in so you can see exactly what not to do. I'm using a stencil that's way too detailed and spraying water through it, and my idea was I was going to flick on pigment powder and it was just going to stick to the water and you'd still see that lovely lacy detailed butterfly pattern. However, my paper was starting to buckle and water got under the stencil and it left no pattern whatsoever, and I just ended up with a hot mess. But I find that a lot of times these messes turn out to be wonderful serendipitous moments. And I really liked the effect of the water and pigment kind of dripping down the page onto her face. I felt like it started to integrate everything, and I decided I was totally just gonna go with it. Of course, I'm playing Monday morning quarterback here because at the time I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to save this? So I decided to grab a hair dryer here, dry some of the painting, also pick up some of the puddle of smudge that I have there, or sludge, and just kind of put a shadow behind some of those butterflies while I'm at it. But mainly I was just thinking, I got to dry this so I can layer something else on top, because I really wasn't sure what I was going to do at this point. So I thought I would add some detail to the butterflies. We're going to get to that in a little bit, also with a tip on how to rejuvenate your pens if they suddenly go dry because you stored them wrong. But for now, I want to do some stamping on the butterflies, because I do love the pattern that's on this stamp. It's like clockworks and steampunkiness. So I figured lining it up by eye was just a recipe for disaster. So I'm using my Stamp-A-Majig to actually stamp over the butterflies that I want to stamp, and I'm heat setting them after I do them so I don't smudge. The ink I'm using for this is VersaFine Onyx Black, because I find that it's just so thick and dark, and it just stamps beautifully, and I find if I'm stamping on a surface that's not exactly smooth, like this paper is a little textured, I know that's going to give me a better result than anything else. You just have to make sure that if you are going to use this, that you heat set it, or you give it ample time to dry, or you heat emboss it. And there I'm using the mask to cover up the butterfly. I cut it in half and just covered up the butterfly pieces that are overlapping that blue one I just did. And so that's how you do that. Using a inexpensive tool like a Stamp-A-Majig. You know, I don't have a Misty. I know everybody's like Misty crazy. I don't have one because I really like the Stamp-A-Majig. I can use it when I just have a little tiny space left on my desk, and it has never served me wrong. So what I'm doing here is just dripping some juicy metallic paint down over the area that had the unfortunate pigment powder incident, because I knew that it would show up really great against that dark powder. So I decided to make lemonade with that lemon, and I really like the way it turned out. So I'm going to be letting that dry so that you really see that glimmer. And over here on this side of the butterflies, I thought if I darken up the background behind them, then I'm going to have a lot more contrast and it's going to look nice. And I had this black metallic watercolor in there, so I figured, why didn't I try that? Because that'll look pretty cool, I think. A lot of experimenting. That's what I do with art journal pages. I don't art journal that much, so I just basically tried to have fun and experiment. I used a white gel pen and a white watercolor crayon to try to smooth out and add some highlights to the skin. I used a gel pen for the sharper highlights, like the lips and the eyes, and then the crayon for softer ones, like on the face, on the skin. And then this is like a glitter marker that I was using for adding some glitz to the lips and also onto the butterflies. So basically I'm using the color of glitter marker that matches the butterfly I'm working on. The glitter markers are by Jane Davenport, and I also have some metallic markers that are by Arteza. Now the glitter markers, I had stored them tip up, and really they should be stored tip down, and I thought I ruined them because they were all dry. But then all I did was I dipped the tip in my water bucket and it rejuvenated it, and I was so happy because they're such glitzy sparkly markers that I thought I'd ruin them. So if you have them and that happens to you, maybe you leave a cap off or you store it tip up instead of tip down, just dip it in water, some nice clean water for a second, and you will revive them. So phew, that was good, because I hadn't even really used them and I was afraid that I had ruined them. And the difference between a glitter marker and a like a mica, like a shimmer marker, is that the glitter marker has like a clear, like a transparent ink and with little flecks of sparkle, and the metallic marker has like a sheen. It's like an opaque sheen, kind of like those golden like Krylon pens. That's kind of like what the metallic markers are versus the glitter marker. So it just depends. If you want something sheer that you can see through, like the glitter on the lips, use the glitter pen, because that will intensify your color and just leave a little sparkle. But if you want to cover over something and have more of like a silvery metallic look, then go for a metallic marker, because that will give you the look that you're after. Now I'm using the glitter pen because it does have that that darker transparent ink in there that will stand up on top of the watercolor I put in there to doodle on the butterfly wings, just kind of scribbly doodle, and I really like the effect that I got with that. Pens, markers, pastels, and crayons are wonderful to use when you're art journaling because you can just express yourself. You don't need to worry about how to hold a brush or how thick to have your paint. You just kind of get in there and have fun. It's very much like being a kid in school with your first box of crayons. You get to really just express yourself. Now I stamped the sentiment "Create Yourself." That's also by Visible Image. It's a coordinating stamp set to the Face It stamp, and I stamped that up in the sky area where I thought it would have the most contrast, having that like kind of black against the metallic. I also grabbed some just regular old wax-based pencils, my Prismacolors, and added some shading onto the face because I thought that it was all just very plain. Like I didn't feel like I had a lot of form to the face. I didn't want to like go over it with acrylics and do anything like crazy time consuming, but I did want to kind of get some shading in there and do some blending, and so I just grabbed a like a light peach color, a brown, a cream, and a white, and a kind of a pink, and went with that. I also grabbed this pretty coral color, but I forgot to use it. That would have been pretty in the cheeks too, but next time, I guess. And then I just kind of very, very gently added very, very light strokes to just kind of rouge up some areas. There's no burnishing here, no like really hard coloring or anything, because the paper is fairly textured. I knew if I started down that path, it was going to completely change the look of her face, and I liked her earnest, innocent expression, and I kind of didn't want to ruin that. I like that you could take just a plain face stamp though, and you can give her like a kind of like a turned up nose, you can give her a cleft chin. You know, there's still a lot of liberties you can take even with when you start off with a stamp. I know it can feel a little bit like, well, I'm just stuck with that face then if I get that face stamp, but there's so much you can do. You could change the facial tones, you could change the color of the eyes, you can add cheekbone lines, you can add contouring, you can do a lot of different stuff there and really make it your own. Now, the one thing with the ink over the metallic, I felt like it wasn't quite dark enough, and you could still see some of the metallic through it, so it would kind of cut down on the contrast. So I did use a black colored pencil to kind of go over it. And then I drew a frame with black and white colored pencils just to kind of draw a little attention to it and give it a little more substance and integrate it into the picture more. And then of course, because I used that black colored pencil there, I felt like I needed to use it elsewhere to make it kind of jive with everything else I had going on. So I used the black to shade around the butterflies to give a little definition lines where I felt like I needed it. And that's pretty much all there is to this piece. And here's a close-up of it. It was a lot of fun to create, and I hope you try these techniques out on your next art journal page. If you want the supplies that I used today, I'll have a full supply list in the video description, including links to our sponsor, topflightstamps.com, so you can find exactly what I used. And don't forget to use the coupon code thefrugalcrafter10 to save 10% on your order at Top Flight Stamps, and USA orders over 50 ship free. This was so much fun to make. I do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.